Welcome to meeting number 92 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room as well as through the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members and the witnesses. Before speaking, please do wait until I recognize you by name. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece which is worn too close to a microphone. A reminder that all comments should be made through the chair. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Now, today we have our briefing on diplomatic relations between India and Canada. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee will proceed to a briefing on diplomatic relations between India and Canada, an issue that is obviously of great concern to very many Canadians. Now, I'd like to welcome today our witnesses. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we are grateful to have two senior officials. We have Mr. Weldon Epp, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Indo-Pacific region, and we also have Ms. Marie-Louise Hannan, who is the Director General for South Asia Bureau. So welcome very much. We're grateful that you made the time to appear before us. Please do bear in mind that when it is, you only have 20 or 30 seconds remaining, whether it's in your opening remarks or when you're responding to questions by the members, I will hold this up. That means please do wrap it up as soon as possible. So that all having been explained, we will start with Mr. Epp. Mr. Epp, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. And Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I just want to thank you for the opportunity this afternoon, to discuss Canada-India relations before this committee. We do so today against the backdrop of undeniably significant challenges, but also in the context of our ongoing shared interests in this very important relationship. And as with any diplomatic relationship, it's important to view all of this with some historical context. Over the last 75 years, Canada and India have had both times of agreement and close cooperation, as well as times of distance and disagreement. Throughout, however, our ties have persisted, and our core cooperation has continued to the benefit of both our countries. In recent years, the importance of this relationship has grown. Put simply, India is one of the world's largest economies, its largest democracy, and a key player in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Our people-to-people ties are unique, have a long history, and they're very expansive. India is a crucial stakeholder to some of the most pressing global problems, whether climate change or global health and beyond. And it's in this context that Canada is managing its bilateral relationship with India following the credible allegations relating to Mr. Hardeep Singh Nijjar's murder. Allow me to underscore, the investigation into Mr. Nijjar's murder is ongoing, and it's therefore important to remember that concerns Canada has raised with India are allegations. The police have not yet released evidence. That said, the nature of the allegations, if proven by evidence in a court of law, are sufficiently concerning and by definition a grievous breach of Canadian sovereignty that they warranted immediate diplomacy. Simply put, business as usual was not an option. From the outset, Minister Joly provided clear direction that Canada's approach to the allegations should be guided by three principles: seeking the truth and accountability, protecting Canadians, and defending Canada's sovereignty. This effort requires coordination between different Canadian government departments, as well as respect for the independent lines of work by Canadian law enforcement and intelligence services. Within this, Global Affairs Canada has two major roles. First, we've engaged with the Government of India about the troubling allegations. In September, when the Prime Minister first addressed this issue, his public comments were based on credible information, and since then, unsealed U.S. indictment has shed further light on Canada's concerns. The Indian government has committed to examining the American claims based on evidence in this indictment through an independent, high-level committee, and this is a positive development. Moreover, it's reasonable to assume that when the RCMP investigation reaches a comparable inflection point here in Canada, more information will be available for the Indian government and its high-level committee to consider. GAC's second role has been to manage our broader bilateral cooperation in areas of shared importance. And that means supporting the movement of people between our countries, making sure that business can do business, and working together on critical global issues at tables like the G20, a forum that Prime Minister Trudeau attended in person in September and virtually in November. Canada and India also continue to cooperate on security and anti-terrorism issues. This is critical to both of our countries. India has raised particular concerns around Canada-based Khalistani violent extremism. We have made our position clear. Canada supports the unity and territorial integrity of India. And while Canadians are free to peacefully express their views, if crimes are committed in Canada, we expect law enforcement to act regardless of who the perpetrator is. Finally, in parallel to all of this, there's been intense and ongoing efforts of these ongoing efforts. There have also been intense efforts to deal with the unprecedented expulsion of 41 Canadian diplomats and their 41 family members from India, while still working to ensure services are provided to Canadians and Indians throughout our mission network in India. In sum, since August, our diplomatic engagement with India managing this issue has been active. As Minister Jolie has said, we're at a moment in time in a relationship that spans decades. We've seen challenging times before, and ultimately, it is in all of our interests to get to the bottom of the allegations by maintaining open dialogue and coordination with India. So GAC will continue working towards an early resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Epp. We now go to Ms. Hannan. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But there's
both of you. My apologies. My bad.
Us, yeah.
Thank you for that. So we first go to MP Epp. You have 5 minutes, sir. 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing. And Mr. Epp, it feels a bit weird for me to address it that way, but it is accurate and true. I appreciated your opening comments regarding the importance of the relationship with India, and I don't want my questions to be construed as undervaluing that relationship with India. Let's start with, I'm going to actually start with some foreign interference. CSIS briefing to the Minister of Democratic Institutions, which was just published, the Global News republished it on February the 2nd from a last February 2023 note, said that, or basically said that Canada must do more to protect our democratic institutions regarding foreign interference. Specifically, when did the Prime Minister become aware of this issue with India specifically? And secondly, what safeguards have been put in place to deal with these allegations?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll answer the question in a couple parts, but briefly, Global Affairs Canada's role, and this is the part that I'll speak to. Obviously, the matter of foreign interference cuts across a number of departments and agencies, mainly in the public safety portfolio, but we also have a role to play. To the question of when the Prime Minister became aware, the information that's the basis for the credible allegations came to light late summer, and therefore informed, as the Prime Minister himself has noted, discussions that he had in Delhi at the G20. There was always a risk or a possibility, let's just say, that for a variety of reasons, that information might become public. But until it was public, it was a priority of the Government of Canada to engage the Indian government, raise these concerns directly with them, and once it became public, to respond to them jointly. With respect to the question around democratic institutions, you'll be aware, Mr. Chair, that Global Affairs Canada plays a partnership role with other departments on addressing dynamic concerns of increased foreign interference, and that includes through the lead that we play, including within the G7 on the Rapid Response Mechanism, the RRM. But of course, Global Affairs Canada also plays a role participating through deputy ministers in site with respect to monitoring of interference during elections themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the shooting that you referenced, India's High Commissioner to Canada stated in the Globe and Mail article today, actually, that the office had not received a formal request to cooperate with the RCMP probe. And you mentioned the RCMP investigation in your opening comments. Why is that they had not received an invitation to cooperate?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm aware of the article and also the position that the High Commissioner articulated because it's not actually a new position. It's been repeated in a number of interviews. And it is the case that there's an active RCMP investigation underway. I will refer more specific questions to the RCMP directly, but the Indian position has been until they receive evidence from a police investigation, they will reserve their right as to how they will respond. And so it's not inaccurate to say that while that investigation is still underway, the RCMP is not directly engaging the High Commissioner.
India has been critical of Canada's handling of the extradition treaty that we have in place since '87. What evidence did India present, specifically in the extradition case with Mr. Najjar, and would that evidence have not met the proper level of criminal investigation in Canada? And is that why we did not respond to an extradition request prior to the shooting?
So, Mr. Chair, I will respond to that in general terms, but the general line of question is not inaccurate. There has been ongoing cooperation between Canada and India over many years on extradition-related requests. And it is also the case that historically Canada has extradited individuals to India. And so it's also possible that that could happen again in the future. But the reality is that in many cases, the extradition requests that come forward, and I'm briefed by my colleagues from Justice Canada regularly, there's a body of ongoing requests right now that are being responded to. It is often the case that the evidentiary threshold in Canadian law is not met. And it's important to understand, Mr. Chair, that that threshold is the same whether the extradition request comes from the United States or India or any other government.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Epp. We now go to MP Chattel. You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to continue along these lines. I'd like to further develop my colleague's questioning. Aside from the killing of Mr. Najjar, there are also plots in the United States and suspect activity in the UK, as well as concerns concerning the death of Mr. Kanda. I would like to know, how do you compare Canada's reaction in regard to this situation of Indian interference compared to our significant economic partners such as the United States and the UK?
So that's an important question, Mr. Chair, and I think there's been a lot of commentary to that effect, including by our Indian colleagues. I think it's important to note that there are some commonalities between the case that's underway in the United States and that of Mr. Najjar. There's also some big differences. In the case of the United States, what's under investigation is a conspiracy to murder. In the case of Canada, there's been a murder. Secondly, it is the case that the U.S. legal system differs in a couple of key ways from our own. And so the possibility for an early narrative and disclosure of evidence through, in the U.S., their indictment differs quite significantly from the legal process in Canada. And so the point at which there would be an inflection point in a Canadian investigation such that detailed information supporting the investigation can be released to the public or a foreign government comes at a later stage. And so there's this sequencing kind of disjuncture. But what we do know from the U.S. case, due to the indictment, is that there is a clear link being described by the evidence provided to date.
Et le Royaume-Uni?
And what about the UK?
I guess what I would say is that I don't feel prepared to discuss the details of allegations in the case of the UK. Unlike in the case of the United States, we don't have an active investigation underway that's in the public domain. But it is true that there have been discussions both between our partners and India, but also between partners, between us, the UK, the United States, because we all are dealing with some of the similar impacts of differences between our legal systems, let's just say, and that of India's when it comes to how to deal with allegations of terrorism and extremism. There's a common objective to make sure those kinds of activities don't take place in our countries, but it's not the case that our legal systems treat or define those activities the same as is the case in Delhi.
Merci. Et très rapidement.
Thank you. And very quickly, the place of India in the Indo-Pacific strategy and the approach that Canada takes in terms of diplomacy. And I would like to also speak to the Canadian public. What is the strategy in regard to Canadian businesses?
Indeed, Mr. Chair, the Indo-Pacific strategy that the government launched a year ago is a 10-year strategy. And so I think to the question, while there are challenges, as I mentioned in my opening statement at the moment in our bilateral relationship with India, I don't think anyone would disagree with the strategic importance of India, its economic growth, its global impact. And so, over the course of a 10-year strategy, we fully anticipate leveraging the tools of that strategy, our incredible history, our diaspora, our people-to-people ties with India, and developing further the partnership that both our countries see of interest. We hope to get to that curve strategically sooner rather than later, but of course our priority for now is to pursue the allegations and get to the bottom, as the Prime Minister has said, of Mr. Nijjar's murder. Within the broader context, the IPS, what does it bring to Canadian stakeholders, businesses, universities? I think the government has launched a very ambitious and whole-of-government, whole-of-society agenda for a region which is really driving global growth. It's driving global innovation. And Canadians are reasonably well positioned, but frankly need to work together to have impact in that region. Again, the first year you will have seen some significant successes, including launching a strategic partnership with ASEAN, strengthening of relations bilaterally in Northeast Asia, and we hope to develop that further in the next year.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for testifying before us today and explaining over the long term what's happening between India and Canada. I want to come back to the Prime Minister's declaration in September of 23. So the Minister of Public Safety had told us that the Prime Minister thought it appropriate to make that declaration because the news might be broadcast by national media. 2 questions in that regard. First, should we understand by the Minister's statement that if there had not been concern that the news spread by the media, that the government would have kept this information secret? Second, why risk poison ties with India given the importance of India for Canada when in any event the news would have been made public the next day?
I think happy to answer the question. I think the first part of that 2-part question in a way is speculative because we did know that media were aware of this information and they had sought commentary, and so we knew that a story was going to be coming into the public domain. And I think the first thing to do is just to underscore the unprecedented nature of the story. This was sensational, first time ever on Canadian soil. And so the moment the government understood that that story was going to go public, I think as Minister LeBlanc has previously described, there were also concerns to ensuring that Canadians felt safe, felt secure, felt confident that the government was on top of and aware of the issue and doing what it could to manage the issue. And so I think, to answer your question, there was, you can imagine it, rather implausible that knowing the media was about to release the sensational story that the government would choose simply to not comment. So the Prime Minister's decision, as has been previously described by the Prime Minister and by Minister LeBlanc, was meant to address a concerned Canadian public, reassure them what the government's approach would be in addressing this issue, and how the government had already been actively involved, including the Prime Minister himself in raising it personally with Prime Minister Modi at the G20. I think the Prime Minister has said on record that the intention was never to provoke India. And certainly if you look at Canada's engagement with India, including just in the last year, in the lead up to this, you'll see there was an intensification across the board in trying to build a strong relationship. Thanks.
Une question est demeurée.
So one question is pending. Would the government have chosen not to reveal this to the Canadian public had there not been the threat of it going public? But I see you're not answering that question. Second question, you've recalled that ties between Canada and India have had highs and lows. Now, in your experience, Mr. Would you say that the relations have in the past suffered such a deep low as this most recently, which brings us back to the Cold War, when there were massive expulsions of diplomats? Can we compare the lows that the Canada-India has experienced compared to what we have now?
Mr. Chair, I think I understand the premise is not, I mean, there's no perfect comparison, but I get the spirit of the question. I think it's important to remember that, as I said in my opening, we've had some very challenging periods in our relationship, Air India not least. That was a tragedy both for Canada and Canadians, and also for India and Indians. And there have been different views, as this committee will be aware, about the handling of investigations after that. So that has been a challenging period. I think it's also the case that Canada-India relations recovered from the challenges of India's decision to become a nuclear state, effectively. And these are different situations than the one we're encountering now, which, both with respect to the allegations, are unprecedented, but also with respect, as the Member of Parliament mentioned, the Indian response of kicking out 41 diplomats from Delhi is quite unprecedented.
Merci.
Mr. Bergeron?
Oui. Très rapide.
Thank you. Very quickly, what measures were taken to compensate for the loss in the field of the 41 Canadian diplomats?
Very quickly, we are managing essential services with a reduced team of 21 in Delhi, working across departments, including principally IRCC, which has a huge volume of public services, and to date they're managing to keep up with core services, although service standards and volumes can be expected to bring pressure on that small team in Delhi. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to MP McPherson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today and answering our questions. It's very important for us to have this information, so I really appreciate it. And I'm going to ask some questions about human rights and India's, the current administration's pretty questionable history on human rights. And I guess more specifically, I'm interested in some more information about the arms that we are currently sending to India. We know that Canada's military export sales to India went from $6.2 million in 2021 to $54.8 million in 2022. So that's over a 700% increase in sales. So knowing that the current Modi regime is being criticized for cracking down on political opponents, on minority groups, women, Do you have any concerns about the increase in that sales, the sales of military goods?
So, Mr. Chair, Canada does have an ongoing dialogue with India, as we do in our diplomacy with most countries, on human rights-related issues. And so Canada has raised concerns about human rights-related issues with India, principally in the public domain, through our response to India's Universal Periodic Review at the United Nations Human Rights Committee. And in that, you will see, and the last was in 2022, Canada raised concerns specifically about minority rights. We also raise human rights issues in private, and I think in most cases we're most effective when we keep those sorts of conversations frank and through private diplomacy. To your specific question in terms of relationship or correlation to arms sales, to be honest, Mr. Chair, I have not reviewed recently those figures, but what I can tell you from experience working on similar files is that out of context, it can be at times misleading or confusing to look at the annual figures, because in that sector, in military procurement, often one sale once in 10 years can year on year show a major increase, and the next year it may come down. So I haven't looked longitudinally to see whether that two-year comparison means a trend.
That makes sense. And that actually, I'm going to take a moment now of my time to read a motion into the record. Certainly not something we will debate today, but just to read in. That given the value of military good and technology exported to India from Canada in 2022 exceeds $54.8 million, and pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the committee order Global Affairs Canada to produce all documents, briefing notes, memorandums, and emails between the department and the Minister of Foreign Affairs Office, the Privy Council Office, and the Prime Minister's Office related to the granting of any arms export permits to India between 2021 and 2024 within 30 days of the adoption of this motion, and that these documents be provided to the committee without redaction except to protect cabinet confidence. And I'll send that around in both languages so everyone has that. And thank you for that. My next question follows, again, some of the concerns that we have with regards to human rights and India's National Investigative Agency. So knowing that the NIA, the National Investigation Agency, has released hit lists of Sikhs living in other countries, including Canada, is there any concern about sharing information between the RCMP and the NIA?
Mr. Chair, I think that the conditions under which Canada will share information relating to Canadian citizens or nationals living in Canada will always be compliant with Canadian legal standards. That's the premise under which we share information for investigations in foreign countries, not least extradition requests.
And knowing that this particular relationship with the NIA is a little bit fraught very fraught because of the current context, and because we have seen that they have identified Canadians on hit lists. Like, that would obviously make that a very, very sensitive area that you would want to be very, very cautious on what we release with regards to information.
Indeed, and I have full confidence, Mr. Chair, that the RCMP is alive to that and following Canadian legal standards in terms of how to respond to those concerns.
I think I'm done.
Yes,
Sorry.
that's correct. So we go to the second round, and we start off with MP Hoback. You have 4 minutes.
4 minutes, it doesn't seem like enough time. But you have to be very quick, Mr. Epp. Is this the normal process we follow in a situation like this? Is it normal protocol in how we handled the information from what we'd gathered through the investigation to relying that information into India, for example, in this case? If we had another country involved in something similar, would we do it the same way?
Mr. Chair, can I just clarify, you're referring to the police investigation
That's
underway
right.
in...
Yeah. How it's handled.
Mr. Chair, understanding that I'm a diplomat and not a policeman or investigator.
The process for notifying the other country would be
the notification for any information required would come at the point in an investigation at which the police and prosecution were ready, presumably to lay charges. And so for the police, their approach to engaging foreign governments would be, in this case, no different than any other.
So is it normal then, again, a situation like this, that the Prime Minister make the announcement, or should the police make the announcement in regards to the accusations? Because there hasn't been charges laid, from what I understand.
So I think it's important, Mr. Chair, to be precise about wording. I don't believe the Prime Minister leveled accusations. My recollection is that the Prime Minister spoke in the House of Commons about allegations.
Okay.
And he referred to allegations of a serious nature based on information available.
So why would
But he
do
also
it?
referred to
Why-
the importance of allowing a police inquiry to continue and have the space to do what it does.
Okay, and again, I'm sorry, I'm just short for time, so I have to be fast here. Why would the Prime Minister do that in the House of Commons in this scenario? Why wouldn't the RCMP do it? Who made that decision that we were actually going to talk about it in the House of Commons? Because we talked about the political sensitivity regarding this. We still didn't have the information out of the U.S. at this point in time. So why was the decision made to do it through the House of Commons and not through a press release or a media conference with the RCMP?
So, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the point at which the RCMP's investigation has reached the stage at which it would proceed through a potential prosecution, there would be a charge sheet released. There would be an announcement of
but
charges.
that hasn't been done yet.
And that hasn't been done yet because that investigation is still alive. In the middle of that investigation, or at least at an earlier point in September, it was the case that the government became aware that the media was about to release information regarding this case. And so the government prepared to respond
But
and
that
discuss
happens
those
in
matters in
all
public.
sorts of investigations. There's rumors that media is going to break a story, but if the RCMP in this case isn't ready to lay charges, why would the Prime Minister feel the need or the pressure to go in the House of Commons and do that? Why wouldn't he just let the RCMP say no comment? We have nothing to add at this point in time. Why would they allow the story to pick up pace? Because we look at the political damage by him politicalizing it in the House of Commons. Why would we do that? Why wouldn't we just let it stay at a low level until we had that charges actually being laid? That's a different story. You're laying charges now, that's pretty serious. But the Prime Minister making comments in the House of Commons, that's very serious. Would that maybe justify why India reacted the way it did?
Mr. Chair, I'm not going to be here to justify how India reacted. I think I spoke earlier, and I'll repeat again, that the allegations were sensational and unprecedented. And since Mr. Najjar's murder earlier in summer, it is the case that that community of Canadians had already been very concerned about their security, that there were a lot of rumors going on. And so the point at which this information was going to
hear you,
become
and I
public,
don't disagree with you,
the
but-
government
but the Prime Minister
chose
didn't
to
provide-
speak to it.
Mr. Hoback, I'm afraid your time is over.
Thank you, Mr. Rapp.
So we now go to MP Zuberi. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. As you mentioned, the people-to-people ties between India and Canada are very important. We have a lot of Canadians of Indian heritage who have important ties, still have important ties to India, and our relationship is critically important. It was mentioned in November of 2023, India's High Commissioner to Canada, Mr. High Commissioner Sanjay Kumar Verma, said that there have been a lot of conversations between India and Canada, and that there's been a lot of dialogue, and he says, I feel that most of it is constructive. How would you characterize the tone of things today, given what has transpired in the last months?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, there's no question that these events, the allegations and how governments have responded to them, have brought on a very challenging period in Canada-India relations, but it's also the case, as my colleague, the High Commissioner for India, Mr. Verma, has described it, that there continues to be constructive engagement on both sides. I can speak further to that with respect to government engagement, which remains intensive. But I would also point out, Mr. Chair, that across society, engagement also remains robust. We seek perspectives, and we understand from the business community that trade and investment relations continue to be strong. We have not seen any impediment to that. And there continue to be many other channels of people-to-people cooperation. Thank you.
With respect to visas, which are important for people to visit their families and also to come to Canada, has there been an impact with respect to the issuance of visas from Canada to India, India to Canada, for people who want to see each other or study in Canada?
Mr. Chair, you'll recall that in fall there was a temporary pause on the side of the Indian government in terms of issuance of some categories of visas to Canadians. That has largely, although not entirely, been restored, but the visa services for the vast majority of visa categories used by Canadians have been restored. With respect to Canadian visa services to Indian nationals, there's no question that the expulsion of 2/3 of our diplomats from our High Commission in India has had an operational impact. That said, both GAC and IRCC have worked very hard together to ensure that the remaining core team of IRCC colleagues, together with their local staff, are able to address as best as possible the volume of visas. And I agree, Mr. Chair, it's in our interest, and I believe in the interest of our Indian colleagues, to continue to support a robust family, student, immigration, business, people-to-people flows. Thank you.
So the conversation around foreign interference has been quite robust, and we saw the concerns around Mr. Najjar's death, and that will be going to court. With respect to, there have been also reports around interference in other areas, including in the Conservative leadership race of 2022 and a nomination in the Conservative Party of March 23. Have those allegations at all created any strain or in the relationship, and have they been raised?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think members of the committee will be aware that the public inquiry into foreign interference has scoped in India into its discussions. And so there's no question that both the work of that inquiry and the resulting public discussion around these issues will do two things. One, it will shed light on whether they're, what the nature of those concerns and how the government has been or could be addressing them. But I think it will also inevitably bring a degree of, let's be honest, additional risk to diplomatic relations. And that's, I think, just part of Canada doing its thing, addressing a very important public issue. And taking the time to do it. And we speak to our Indian colleagues, as well as others, to explain to them the parliamentary process that led to that commission of inquiry and to ensure they understand what it is and what it isn't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back to the last question I asked as to measures taken to continue to be efficient despite the expulsion of 41 Canadian diplomats and family members. Did we increase the number of employees that were employed locally?
So let me answer that in a couple of ways. There are two moving parts, if I might. There's the High Commission of Canada in Delhi. And in that case, it was the government of India's decision to effect a unilateral mass expulsion of 41 diplomats. That has meant our team is smaller with respect to Canadians accredited to India, but our local staff still continue to work and are managed providing services across business lines to Canadians. With respect to consulates general, those consulates provide some services remotely at this time, but are not currently providing in-person services. Those in-person services have been brought to and are delivered by our High Commission out of Delhi. And so there are some challenges with respect to delivery of services. But for example, with respect to supporting companies, investing and trading, we continue to have both Canadian and local staff who were in the consulates providing those services to Canadian companies. Local staff are still in those cities, and their managers are either in Delhi or working from the region to support those services either remotely or as delegations come through in person. Thank you.
Est-ce qu'on a accru le nombre
Did we increase the number of local employees? Did we increase the number of local employee hired?
No. Sorry to be difficult getting to the direct answer. No.
OK. Est-ce
Thank
qu'il
you.
me reste du temps?
You're
Do I have time left? Out of time.
MP McPherson, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for your testimony this afternoon. You spoke a little bit, Mr. App, about some of the things that Canada has done to express our discomfort and our displeasure with the human rights abuses that have been occurring. Can you tell us a little bit more about the steps that Canada is taking to address the anti-minority hate speech from elected members of the BJP and discriminatory laws targeting religious minorities and recognizing that these are the causes of Indian foreign interference in Canada that is targeting our Indian diaspora communities?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And to frame again, Canada continues to raise issues of concern with all countries, including India, diplomatically. In the case of India, India is also a democracy, just like Canada, an imperfect democracy, but it does have longstanding institutions of democracy which provide some degree of as Canada's do, puts and takes. It is the case, for example, that India's democracy continues to produce largely free and fair elections. It is the case that India's Supreme Court and Constitution are independent institutions of the government. And so for the Government of Canada, when we see that we have specific concerns with respect to fellow democracies, we do tend to raise those issues in a spirit of exchange in private diplomatic meetings, or in the case of multilateral platforms like the Human Rights Committee during the UPR process.
And those things are happening, they are being raised, because one of my concerns, of course, is that we have an Indo-Pacific strategy that is seeking to develop relationships aside from China, because of course China has some very serious human rights abuses that we know they are committing against the Uyghur people, for example. And yet it does seem
I'm afraid
that
if I could ask that you allow him to respond in less than 10 seconds, please, because we're considerably over time.
Chair, I didn't ask a question. It's hard for him to respond. It's fine. I'm
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
Are you sure? Yes. Okay. Thank you, MP McPherson. We now go to MP Chong. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing. The British Columbia Gurdwaras Council and the Ontario Gurdwaras Committee have said that Canada's extradition process, as you noted, that has been in place since the late 1980s, is being used by the Indian government to, quote, stifle political dissent and silence government critics, end quotes. Do you share these concerns, and why or why not?
Mr. Chair, I have full confidence in the Canadian extradition process and related law. As members of the committee may know, I have had some experience of that with respect to Canada-China relations recently. Canada has a very high standard. The test that needs to be met, the threshold for Canada to pursue an extradition is quite high, as you know. And if anything, that has been a challenge, as was raised earlier, in bilateral relations as we work to understand legitimacy or the substance of specific extradition requests.
Thank you. One of the former foreign policy advisors to the current government has said in the Globe and Mail that the subject of Khalistani extremism came up in every single meeting with Indian officials in every talking point and every pull aside. So my question is, does the government believe that there is Khalistani terrorist financing activities going on in Canada? And if so, what is being done to address the issue?
So, Mr. Chair, I mean, aspects of the question get us into assessments that, would come to my purview in Global Affairs Canada through intelligence means and others, a subject of ongoing investigations or police work. I won't speak to the specifics. What I will say is that the premise is correct, that concerns about Khalistani extremism and transnational crime are top of mind for the Indian government. It's fair to say that we've had long-standing exchanges on this matter, and in some cases we've been able to advance those exchanges through structures. For example, we have an ongoing GAC-led Canada-India Counterterrorism Working Group. That group will be meeting again soon, and we use those platforms to address definitional differences, but also common objectives. So, for example, how India defines extremism or even terrorism does not always compute in our legal system, but there is an overlap, and that's why we have these discussions, including that working group, to address those issues.
And, the government is, closely related to the issue of terrorist financing and extremist financing is the whole issue of money laundering and beneficial ownership registries. Can you tell us what role GAC has, if at all, in the implementation of new measures to combat money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada? I'm thinking about the new federal beneficial ownership registry that's coming into place. I'm thinking about, the proposed Financial Crimes Agency of Canada, which was announced, and other measures that have been talked about and announced by the government.
So, Mr. Chair, it's a terrific question. I'll readily admit it's not my métier or my area of specialization. I do know colleagues from our legal branch are very involved, but I'm afraid I can't speak to the details of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. We now go to MP Oliphant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Epp, and officials for being here today. I want to start, I think, very publicly saying that we are in this position, and I want to acknowledge the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and offer again publicly condolences to his family and to the community in Surrey that was profoundly affected by that tragic killing, and it has brought us to a difficult position. The second thing I want to do is ask you to express to our officials in the mission who are remaining in Delhi, as well as those working remotely serving, as well as locally engaged staff, our appreciation for working under very difficult circumstances and extending, whether it's on the immigration side, the trade side, the foreign affairs side, all the consular side, for continuing to do that work in very difficult situation. The third thing I'd like to say, and it's somewhat rhetorical, and I don't really expect an answer, but can you imagine the outrage from the opposition if the Prime Minister had not taken the opportunity to speak to members of Parliament about this situation and had done it somewhere else or allowed it to happen somewhere else? I don't expect an answer. But I think it showed a great respect for us as members of Parliament. That was the venue that he chose to raise these allegations. With respect to the position we're in right now, since that killing last year, both the United States and the UK have raised allegations about inappropriate activities by the Indian government in those two very close, there are probably no two closer allies to Canada than we have with the UK and the US. How is our conversation? Do we have a conversation with them about this? How is our approach similar or dissimilar to this? We have the facts are different in what happened. However, are we engaged with our allies on this particular problem?
Mr. Chair, I just want to express my appreciation for the sentiment, and I will convey to our High Commissioner, Cam McKay, and his colleagues the sentiments expressed of support. It's been a very difficult stretch for their team, and they appreciate all the understanding and support. With respect to our conversations with like-minded, these have been intensive. This is a very, again, unprecedented and intensive challenge that we're working through. There are also cross-cutting concerns, as I mentioned earlier. All three countries, the two partners you named and Canada, have large diaspora communities which have been targets of transnational crime. There have been challenges that affect these communities. And so there's both a concern for domestic security as well as engaging India on addressing those domestic matters that may play out in our legal systems differently than they do in India. I would just also add that for Canada, it has been important to work with these partners to ask questions of our Indian colleagues, as these partners have. And if you note, after the Prime Minister's statement in which he asked that the government of India clarify its stance on arbitrary extrajudicial killings with respect to international law, we have seen that clarification from the government of India in the public domain by the Union Home Minister when he did clarify that it is not India's policy, it's never been. And so it's important to raise these questions, for Canada to raise them, to receive an official position from the Indian government, to hear from the Indian government, including Prime Minister Modi, that they will, quote, definitely look into any evidence and hold people accountable if there's evidence provided. And so working with our partners, we'll have to continue to raise these issues and have those conversations.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Abultaif. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the witness. Mr. Epp, you mentioned that there was a non-conversation at the G20 between the Prime Minister and Prime Minister Modi. Regarding that, do you believe that the incident or the episode where the Prime Minister brought this to the Parliament was a reaction to what happened at the G20?
Mr. Chair, no. The Prime Minister's decision and the government's decision, as both Prime Minister, Minister LeBlanc, Minister Joly have explained, related to addressing a very sensational and unprecedented matter that the media was bringing to the Canadian public's knowledge, and the importance of speaking directly to Canadians about the government's knowledge of these allegations and what it was doing about it.
Do you believe that India have overreacted in their response by expelling our diplomats?
Mr. Chair, we were all surprised by the decision of the Indian government to kick out 41 Canadian diplomats. This is unprecedented in diplomatic history globally, and so yes.
So was that a sudden overreaction, or was collective incidents that happened after the Prime Minister Trudeau took prime ministership?
Mr. Chair, to be fair, I cannot possibly speculate on the calculus that went into taking that dramatic decision on the part of the Indian.
No, based on your observation, I guess.
Well, I would just repeat my observation that it's highly unusual. There are tools to address concerns about specific individual diplomats posted abroad. PNG is its known persona non grata. But that's not what the Indian government chose to do. They did not, for example, name specific Canadian diplomats and say, we would like to kick this diplomat out of the country. They unilaterally resized our mission in Delhi.
Do you think the current situation have affected our relationships with our allies as well as with other countries?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't want to speculate. What I would say is that we continue to have close partnerships with our like-minded, as well as partners around the world who understand that this is a unique situation, and I think our understanding of the manner in which the Canadian government has responded to unexpected developments.
but you represent the department where basically you've got this history together, and as I said, as observer, and have the knowledge and the ideas. We would value your opinion on this, because I think it's very important for the committee to know how this incident have affected our relationships, and I mentioned our allies as well as our other countries.
Mr. Chair, I would simply observe that we continue to have very close discussions with our allies about some of the very difficult issues that these incidents have brought to foreign ministries. Minister Jolie has intensively engaged her colleagues, and not just allied colleagues, but diverse colleagues from around the world, to understand their perspectives, to share Canada's views, to share our position, and to, at the bottom of it, underscore the government's position, which is that while these are allegations, they're quite serious, and it will be important to work together to allow justice to take its course.
Is it normal practice for, in situations like this, for a Prime Minister to bring this whole situation to the House of Commons all of a sudden, without trying to find other ways to reveal what we have, and at least to express it in a different way?
Mr. Chair, there's no way I can answer that, because this was entirely unprecedented in nature. I wouldn't compare it to any other previous episode in diplomatic history for Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Epp. We now go to Ms. MP Alghabra. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here and for your service to Canada. I do want to make a comment first because I find it quite surprising that the Conservatives keep talking about the point of a utility at the House of Commons, given how much it's the issue of China comes up in the House of Commons every day, and rightly so, because our constituents expect us to have these debates, vigorous debates in the House of Commons, whether it's China, India, or the United States, or any other country for that matter. So I just wanted to make that known for the record. Mr. Epp, as you alluded to in your opening remarks, the relationship between India and Canada is extremely important for Canada. I would argue it's extremely important for India. There are almost 2 million Canadians of Indian background who have affection and familial ties. There are thousands of businesses who are either doing business in India or interested in doing business in India. And the growth potential, as for the Indo-Pacific strategy lays down or lays out, is extremely promising. However, the question is, and I know most of my colleagues' question and your remarks have been trying to deal with this, is how do you navigate the desire and the interest of having a strong diplomatic and economic relationship, but at the same time ensure that we have our ability to have our domestic debates of what Canadians expect their government to stand up for internationally and domestically on human rights, on values? How do we navigate that? Because I know sometimes the advice is, can we do it privately? And yes, it needs to be done privately, but sometimes it also needs to be done publicly, because Canadians need to have faith that their governments is promoting their values and their interests. So how do we navigate that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think the Government of Canada, Global Affairs Canada, has, just believes that there's a time and a place for both private diplomacy and public comment. As the members of the committee are aware, there was private diplomacy underway before it became known that there would be a media story, and before the Prime Minister made his statement in the House. So private diplomacy had its use. It's also the case, and Minister Jolie has been clear on this as well, that most often diplomacy is most successful when it takes place in private conversations as opposed to in a noisy public domain. But it's important for Canadians to know how the Government of Canada is protecting their security, including in a situation like this, the security of Canadians, of all Canadians, regardless of their background within Canada, how we're defending our sovereignty, and how we're managing for an incredibly important relationship that will continue to be important, as the member said, for both Canada and India. So for the Government of Canada and for Global Affairs Canada, both can be true at the same time, and we'll continue to look for opportunities to remain in dialogue with the Indian government, even as the investigation and next steps in terms of cooperation on getting to the bottom of the Nijjar murder will potentially take some time.
10 seconds.
So again, the issue of speaking in the House of Commons, not only to members of Parliament, but to all of Canada, is an important channel for Canadian leaders to share with Canadians what we are doing to protect Canadians and to protect the interests of Canada. I guess I don't expect an answer. I had 10 seconds, so I wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Alghabra. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2 minutes, sir.
I would like to come back to the question of the impact of the expulsions of the 41 diplomats, given that, according to the Indian High Commissioner to Canada, it was a measure or a reciprocity measure. My question is simple. Is that usual practice in the world of diplomacy, to have the same number of diplomats on each side? And if not, what's the reasoning behind this reciprocity referred to by the High Commissioner?
So it's important to go back to base principles, Mr. Chair, and the basis for managing diplomatic relations being the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. In short, that convention nowhere uses the term parity, and that term was the basis on which the Indian government explained its expulsion of 41 diplomats. It is the case that the VCDR, as it's known, the Vienna Convention, provides for host states to place limits on the number of diplomats that a sending state would have posted, but that requires consultations and has to take into account both the needs of the host state and the conditions of the sending state. And so the idea of some kind of pure literal parity or pure reciprocity in numbers simply doesn't exist in the Vienna Convention. That word doesn't exist, and there's no agreed definition of that in international law. So we reject the Indian government position in this regard, and we've been quite clear on that.
Thank you. We next go to MP McPherson. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would also like to make a comment following up on my colleague, Mr. Alghabra's comments on the Conservatives' participation. I mean, I recognize that they didn't think it was appropriate for the Prime Minister to bring it up in the House, but on the other hand, I didn't find particularly appropriate that when we did have a debate in the House of Commons, that they did not participate at all in that debate, that take note debate on the death, the tragic death and murder of Mr. Nijjar. So, do want to make that point as well. But I want to ask a few questions about the foreign interference inquiry process, if I could. We've seen the Uyghur representation has pulled out of that process. They're worried about whether or not it will be fair and transparent. What efforts are being made to ensure transparency in the process, especially regarding the disclosure of evidence to the public?
So, Mr. Chair, and I want to get to this quickly so I don't waste the member's time. I'm not in a position to comment on the specifics of the inquiry and its terms of reference. It's underway, and I will leave items that should come before that inquiry to the inquiry.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess one last question I just had for you is back to the issue of the Indo-Pacific strategy. As we look at the human rights issues that we see coming out of India, the question that I was going to ask in the last section is, how do we justify taking our eggs from one basket where we're quite concerned about human rights and put them in another basket where, of course, human rights should be a deep concern as well. So from my perspective, I think I have a lot of challenges that the government is doing, quiet diplomacy, perhaps some open diplomacy, but this is a country that is conceivably has allegedly killed a Canadian citizen. So, democracy or not, having that relationship seems very fraught with me, and I don't understand how we balance that just being quiet. I have a little bit of trouble with that, and I'd love your insight onto that, Mr. Epp.
Again, we're over time, so if you could keep your response to less than 10 seconds.
Mr. Chair, I'll be very quick. I mean, the question has a reasonable premise. I believe the government's decision, for example, to pause free trade negotiations with India reflects the premise that given the serious nature of the allegations, it's not currently business as usual, but we do have an important long-term strategic relationship with India, and Canadians and Indians do as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We now go to MP Chong. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just building on the questions I was asking earlier, the High Commissioner has said, the Indian High Commissioner to Canada has said that, quote, some Canadian citizens are using Canadian soil to launch attacks on Indian sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is against any international law, end quote. What does the Government of Canada say to that?
So, Mr. Chair, we take note of those comments, and we've heard those views expressed in diplomatic meetings repeatedly. But, for example, referring to the interview in the Globe and Mail today with the High Commissioner, he also does point out that there is a difference in the definition of, for example, terrorism between Canada and India. And so it's important for governments, India or otherwise, to bring forward concrete, substantiated cases and not just allegations. Canada has an elaborate and well-staffed set of teams, be it at Justice Canada, be it with the RCMP, including our liaison officers abroad and so on and so forth, to work with foreign countries to address issues of transnational crime, including terrorism, when there is evidence. In the case of our relationship with India, it has sometimes been a sticking point that we're aware they have concerns, we're ready to deal with them. I know there's a current very active caseload, as I said, for Justice Canada, and part of that gets to saying, here's what our threshold is. Can you provide evidence that meets that? For example, Justice Canada has, and the RCMP in the past, done effectively workshops with the Indian government to explain what our standards legally would be. So, it's important. I mean, I understand the High Commissioner has a job to do and has his instructions. We speak about these issues regularly. We're diplomats. At the end of the day, what's really important is for his government's justice and policing agencies and institutions to work closely with ours. And I know,
some people would argue that GAC is a central agency, and as such, should be within the machinery of government, providing advice to and directing other departments in terms of threats that we're facing. Like, if it is the case that Canada is being used as a staging ground to fundraise for terrorism, to fundraise for extremist activities taking place in other countries, surely GAC has a role to play in working within the machinery of government to convey that problem to the other parts of the government that are responsible for dealing with it on Canadian soil.
Mr. Chair, it's a fair point. There's an ongoing discussion between departments. GAC is part of that conversation. We don't lead on determining whether there are grounds for those accusations and how to deal with them within Canadian borders, but we certainly support, through a number of mechanisms, ongoing dialogue about how to address international crime. We have, as members may be aware, mechanisms for funding international capacity building on international crime, cross-border crime, as well as terrorism. So there's a role for
I raise
GAC.
this because it seems to me that we're becoming an increasing haven for transnational repression, in part funded by financing activities that are illicit. You know, I look at TD Bank's cancellation of a proposed takeover of a U.S. regional bank, I think a $13 billion U.S. dollar takeover bank that was kiboshed by U.S. regulators because of money laundering concerns. I see FinTrack's recent fines leveled against big Canadian banks. Royal Bank, I think, got a $7 million fine. TD got fined over $10 million. Other banks got fined all in the last month or so. And then just this past week, $65 million fine against Royal Bank's subsidiary for money laundering. Like, it seems like we are
Mr. Chong,
the
you're
nexus
well over 4 minutes.
of this
Do you
stuff.
have a question?
So that's why, yes, quite simply, former National Security Intelligence Advisor Jody Thomas recently visited India to talk about the Nijjar assassination. Can you tell us about that trip?
So quickly, Mr. Chair, I won't get into the details of this trip or that, but the bottom line is that Canadian senior officials, including National Security and Intelligence Advisor, Deputy Minister Morrison, and others have intensively used our existing channels of diplomacy to make sure the Indian government understands the nature of our concerns, to describe the allegations that we're concerned with, and to look at ways to move forward together to get to the bottom of the matter. Thanks.
Thank you. And for the last 4 minutes, we go to MP Khalid. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I'll get right into it. Now, how has India's extreme reaction to Canada's credible allegations impacted its relationships with its allies and with its, I guess, regional neighbors as well, or has it impacted them?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any direct impact of the current challenges between Canada and India on India's relations with its neighbors.
And so you had mentioned about us stalling now on agreements, trade agreements that we have done. Has that benefited any other country in that region?
Mr. Chair, no, I'm not aware of any benefits to any other countries in this regard. And it should be noted, trade negotiations can move quickly, they can move slow. And so, these are long, they can be quite long processes, both for Canada and for other countries, I would add, in pursuing trade agreements with India in this case.
Thank you. And, over these past number of years, from the Prime Minister's trip to India and now this issue, have you, in Global Affairs, been monitoring social media campaigns spreading misinformation, disinformation on this issue specifically as it has arisen now?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we monitor all forms of media quite closely, and I think it's been very interesting to see the amount of chatter, the amount of kind of discussion of these matters, both on social media in Canada, but also within India.
Are you able to describe that for us?
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess what I would say is that there, some of the more sensational, if I might put it this way, elements of what's happened, for example, allegations of potential links between India and the death of a Canadian, obviously generate a lot of commentary. But also the expulsion of Canadian diplomats generated a lot of coverage. And look, suffice it to say, India is a democracy, it's very diverse, there are many voices, it's got an active media, and it's in the middle of, or close to, a formal election campaign. So in terms of Indian social media, quite reasonably, although this, one could argue, is not the main event, it comes up frequently in domestic discussion about India's foreign policy.
Thank you. And you had mentioned, obviously India is a very diverse country, very much like Canada, dealing with a lot of different cultures, a lot of different religions, etc. How have different diaspora communities reflected on or have reacted to this relationship or this turbulence within the relationship?
Mr. Chair, I have not spent time thinking, I'm not aware my colleagues have, in parsing the responses or the reactions of different communities within Canada. I think it's important to emphasize that for Global Affairs Canada, we look at the impact of foreign policy on Canadian citizens, irrespective of their religious or community interests. It is the case that the community of Canadians of Indian heritage is quite significant, quite large, historically longstanding, and quite diverse. And so naturally there will be, as for all Canadians, very different and distinct views about what's happening between Canada and India. I think that's entirely normal, and we don't, we're not guided by sort of that sort of analysis. Our interest is in making sure that the services that Global Affairs Canada is responsible for and the diplomacy that is our mandate to manage is managed with the interests of all Canadians at heart. Thank you.
It seems a bit strange to me because when we talk about
College,
One
you're
last
out of
comment,
time.
Chair.
No, you're considerably out of time, I'm afraid. So at this juncture, I just wanted to take the opportunity on behalf of the entire committee to thank you, Mr. Epp. Thank you, Ms. Hennin. We're very, very grateful for the time and the perspective and the expertise you brought to our committee. So we will suspend for 4 minutes, I take it, 3-4 minutes, and then we will come back for committee business.
Thank you.